Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. For those of you who don't already know me, I'm the Director of Marketing at Caseware RCM and today's moderator. I hope you're doing well. So today's webinar is managing monitoring rules in light of indictments. So we have a full hour of content to present. So I'd like to get started. Now, we have a new presenter today, and I'm very excited to have Sarah Beth join us for today's presentation. Now, if you've never spoken to Sarah Beth or checked her out on LinkedIn, she's a dynamic speaker who's not afraid to lay out the facts for you. So Sarah Beth Felix is the founder and owner of Palmera Consulting, which is a specialized AML CTF advisory firm providing AML system validations, remediations, SME roles, product rollout, and risk assessments. She does bring 18 years of anti-financial crime experience, 14 years of CAM certification, and she's worked with financial institutions of all types, including banks, credit unions, fintechs, trade finance institutions, MSBs, brokers, dealers, and mortgage companies. She is recognized by the compliance industry for her ability to navigate and operationalize global AML CTF regulations. And as a former AML officer, she provides actionable, sustainable, and effective solutions through firsthand knowledge of how systems and data impact daily compliance efforts. So I'm really excited to have Sarah Beth on board. I hope you enjoy the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand over the slides over to Sarah Beth.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to work with you and your team there. So today we're going to talk about something that a lot of my clients and colleagues in the industry ask me, like, how do you digest, if you will, when all of these indictments come out, when consent orders come out, when the guidance comes out that shows actual cases, whether it's from the FATF or from FinCEN here in the US, how do you get it out so quickly? And so I thought, why not walk through kind of the secret sauce, if you will, to how I'm able to operationalize a lot of the data that's sometimes buried in a very boring and long report. So this is the agenda for today. We're going to spend a lot of time in the examples section because I have two different indictments, a consent order for an institution, as well as an FIU guidance, and then FATF guidance, and also Egmont, and then also the Egmont cases. So I want to kind of just blaze through here, but I want to get a feel for what everyone is doing so far. If you've never done this before, if you just kind of wait, if you have a negative news application that you use to screen your customers, so sometimes you wait on that, which is kind of the end result of the indictment hitting the news, and then therefore it screens and pops a flag in your system. If you don't have a negative news, do you follow anyone on LinkedIn, any federal law enforcement officers on LinkedIn, so you can see when they're posting? So that's what this poll question here is. Do you review indictments or consent orders to determine whether or not they are applicable to your customer base or to your transactional makeup? Sweet. Well, this is pretty good. We have a lot of people that say yes when you have time, which obviously, as a former practitioner, I know that time really is something that you're always managing, especially because a lot of times you're under-resourced. All right. So I think that, can we publish the results? Can we end it and publish? Okay.
Yep. There's just a few more people answering that. Yep. Okay. And so, yeah, so Nicole has published them for you.
Great. Okay, so it looks like the majority is yes when I have time, which is great. So I hope what we're going to go over today is useful, and I hope it kind of gives you some efficiencies when you're looking for this information. All right, so before we move into the examples, I wanted to at least make sure we're kind of all on the same page. for the transaction monitoring side of things. So a lot of times we hear this risk-based approach, risk-focused approach, and what I'm finding, especially in community institutions, is that it's kind of like, what does that mean, right? Everyone uses that term. The FATF uses it, FinCEN uses it, Egmont, every supranational body, as well as local FIUs, are using risk-based and risk-focused approach. And so one of the things to remember is that you can't really say you have a risk-based approach unless you are fully aware of your threats and your vulnerabilities. Those are required before you make a statement like, this is based off of my risks, this is my risk-based approach. If you're saying that, but you haven't actually found what your threats and your vulnerabilities are, both at your country level and at your institutional level, it's going to leave some holes in your program. So what that means, and I was asked very recently by a community institution, what does that mean? So when I say threats, at least in the US, we have the Treasury, they release their national strategy report. And if your country is a member of the FATF, they are required to do a threat and vulnerability analysis and publish it to the FATF. So your country, if you are in compliance with the FATF, will have some type of document that lists what their country level threats and their vulnerabilities are. So for the US, it's a lot like every other country, a lot like the FATF's view, where we have drug trafficking, human trafficking, healthcare fraud, threat finance. So those are some of the threats. The vulnerabilities that come into play are some uneven regulatory applications, depending on what type of non-bank financial institution that you are. There's lots of different vulnerabilities. When you're talking about your institutional threat, especially if you're a community institution, you need to be looking for indicators of threats, which would be something like, we have lots of branches located in an area of a lot of traffic. So we have several US interstates that run through our area, or we have a lot of farming communities, farmers in our area. Those types of things give indicators, give some type of notion that you would most likely be more predispositioned to encounter human trafficking in the form of labor trafficking if you're dealing with farming communities. And if you're near interstates, you're going to be looking at drug trafficking, things like that. So, and it's not that like, boom, you have a branch on I-10 and I-95, and therefore all of your branches are going to be just, weighed down with drug trafficking. That's not the point. The point is to look at what your threats are, and your threats are based on where your community is based. One other important thing I want to talk about is that your monitoring approach really needs to be, if you are not refreshing it multiple times a year, if you're waiting for your validation, I would encourage you to reevaluate. If you need to make sure that as your threats change as an institution and as a country, but mainly as your institution, that your rules change. And as DOJ indictments come out, as FATF guidance comes out, which is very frequent at this point, as those come out, I would take those and apply the principles we're going to go through here and make sure you have the right rules in place to monitor. Also, a sign of effectiveness is the referral to the high-risk customer team. A lot of times when I'm performing gap reviews, when I'm, it's not an audit, it's just a secret gap review. Not secret, but it's something that I just do with my client. And a lot of times the first thing I ask is, how many referrals are you getting from your alert disposition team over to your high-risk customer review team? And if the answer is, well, none, then to me, that means that there's not probably the best decisions being made on the alert disposition side, because without that contextual view of the customer, especially if there's a high-risk customer review, even if it's a cursory review of the customer, how can an alert be dispositioned correctly? And then also, you would have alerts that are recurring on customers that you would need to refer over to the high-risk customer team and say, hey, I keep getting this farm that keeps popping. I'm not quite sure what they're doing. Can y'all do a deep dive on this customer and let us know what's happening? So effective high-risk customer programs really are going to impact the outcome of your monitoring program. Those two should be intertwined. Your two teams, and even if you don't have two teams, if you're on a, if you're in a smaller institution, you're like, I only have two people and one does the alerts and one does the high risk customers and everything else. There still needs to be that simpatico between the two teams where there's information fed back and forth, because that's really, you can't disposition alerts on an ongoing basis for the same customer without knowing more contextual information, which you get from a properly done high risk customer review. As far as the topic for what we're going to talk about today, especially in specific indictments, business types are a great starting point for trying to operationalize what your risks are. And you'll see an example of that. And I hope out of this, you will find a fresh view of your current high risk customers, or maybe customers that aren't necessarily high risk, in a formal sense. You wouldn't provide them if an auditor asked for your high risk customer list, but you know them by name. And a lot of community institutions, I find that they really do know that customer by name, and it's typically because they're high on the alerts, right? They are, they trigger alerts all of the time, and so you just kind of know them by name. So I'm hoping out of this that you guys can get a fresh view of some of your current high-risk customers and your current informal higher risk customers. So there's been a couple blind spots that I've seen. A lot of times indictments provide really something that we already know is criminal, right? That's especially in the US. The US does a great job of unsealing indictments. So if you're not in the US, a lot of times other countries don't unseal indictments, meaning that you can't really see. You're just kind of going off of a news article, or maybe your FIU has published what they've done, but you can't really read the nitty gritty, which is often contained in an indictment. So we know when we look at that, that is already something that is illegal, that somebody's already been arrested for. So that's always a good thing. So to me, if you have, an hour a week, I would be looking at indictments, an extra hour. And I know when I say an extra hour, most people are like, that doesn't exist, but, do it over your lunch. I know it's a terrible recommendation, but, try to do it in a way where, it doesn't have to be done every week, but as these indictments come out, that you just kind of take 5 to 10 minutes out of that bucket of an hour a week that you've set aside to go through and look at these, because we already know that they are illegal. And at some point, some institution reported an important piece of that, which then led to the indictment of a crime. So consent orders also provide what I think are great blind spots, especially, earlier this year, last year with the whole Epstein scandal. Consent orders really kind of gave, I think, a warning shot to a lot of institutions that bank higher risk customers. And that's actually one of our examples that we're going to go through today. And lastly, the source that I use is the FATF and the Egmont, because they are, again, supranational. So you have, if you're not US centric, or maybe if you are based in the US, but you have, a lot of clients overseas in certain countries, the FATF and the Egmont provide a lot of global cases. And a lot of times you will see federal law enforcement working together in various countries in order to bring about a prosecution on a case. And that's where the FATF and the Egmont really show some great information about, again, something that's already been deemed a crime, and it comes up as a case. So the main areas really for when we're going to go through how to operationalize this is not in order. This is just how I do it. So when somebody asks me for my secret sauce, if you will, I went and I looked up a DOJ order, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to write down everything that I'm doing. So the first thing I do is I scan. I don't read every single thing. I scan, especially if you're looking at an unsealed indictment. The very top of the indictment, it'll tell you what the crimes are. It'll tell you whether or not it's transportation of drugs, illegal firearms, money laundering, those types of suspected underlying activity. So if it doesn't have money laundering or some type of financial crime to it, I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to go find the one that talks about money laundering. And so when I find that indictment or when I find that news release from the DOJ, I look for industries. Can I isolate an industry in there? I look for instruments used, cash, wires, cashier's checks, etc. I look for the funds flow patterns really quickly. Does it go Mexico, US? Does it go Canada to England? Identify the countries. I want to know exactly how what countries play a role in everything. Is it just in the US? And in some aspects, in some of the DOJ indictments, it'll even tell you some of the states, Florida, Pennsylvania, things like that. Just keep an eye out for, oh, is this super applicable to me because it's in Florida and my bank is in Florida. And then customer types. So those would be like a high net worth client, the son of a political person, those types of customer types. And then the dollar amounts are always key. Because what we're going to do when we kind of scan these documents is we're going to take all of these items and we're going to put them into what would end up being a rule or a parameter. Now, you can't always do this. You can't always get to that micro level, but a lot of times you really can, especially if the indictment has been unsealed. All right, so before we get into some of the examples, just wanted to go through another poll here because I want to know what people are doing. I know that effectiveness is such an elusive term, especially if you're in the US. That FinCEN just published last month regarding their definition, right? They have a notice of proposed rulemaking and they want to know what institutions think that effectiveness means. And they have, I think, 11 questions in that. If you haven't responded and you have time, again, I know time is a commodity at this point, but if you have time, it would be great for you to respond. I know the FATF has published some statements on effectiveness, et cetera. But I want to know, do you test your rules for effectiveness as it relates to your country FIU or your known threats? So this would not look like you waiting for your validation. This would be you testing however you're going to test it, however you define an effective program. Do you test it as it relates to what the FIU has stated are the threats or your known threats to your institution?
Okay. Yeah. So while people are taking a moment to answer the question, Sarah Beth, here's a question: Do regulators or examiners require you to review indictments?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing written. The end result of not being aware of different typologies is an ineffective suspicious activity monitoring program, which they do measure, right? So it's kind of like OFAC. There's no regulatory requirement that says you must screen OFAC. It just simply says you can't do business with anybody on the OFAC list.
Okay.
How you do it is up to you. And so I would take that to mean the same thing on this side. You have to have an effective suspicious activity monitoring program, and how you do it is up to you.
Okay, very good. And so I think people are still answering the survey. So just one more question. So, can people rely on third-party data providers for indictment information?
Yeah, I definitely think that, if you are a larger institution, you have the budget for that. I think a lot of it comes down to budget. But,
Yes,
if you're a larger institution, those are definitely really good things to do. However, a lot of times that's just a static. It's hey, John Doe popped because he made the news because of this indictment, but there's no feedback loop that says, hey, I'm going to go see what John Doe did. I'm going to go see how he used his financial institutions and then go check it against my rules and my alerts and my parameters to see, do we have anyone else that we just don't know about yet? Okay. So that's where a negative news or an adverse media, whatever you're going to call it, can really be a great tool, but it's not really going to do that feedback loop into the effectiveness of your suspicious activity monitoring program unless you are very intentional about it.
Very good. Yeah, so it looks like everybody who wants to answer has answered, and I think you're going to be pleased with the results. Do you want to take a look?
So again, I love all of the yeses. I love talking to people that see a dynamic program. So that is great to see the yeses throughout the year. And then also, I think the second one was only during a formal validation. So, I think a lot of times waiting for a formal validation, you kind of get into the above the line, below the line testing. And I know I'll probably ruffle some feathers on this one, but above the line and below the line testing, only really adds if for known rules. And that's not what we're talking about here. Nothing that we're going to talk about today is something that is already your known structuring rule. And they go in and they do above the line, below the line. Should you change this parameter from 10,000 to 9,900? And then they give you the results of the above and below the line testing. At the end of the day, you don't get written up for not having above or below the line testing, but you do face scrutiny if you don't have an effective program. And again, it comes down to what does effective mean? And I will be submitting, I've got a large presentation on that. So I will be submitting that to FinCEN and then publishing it later. But and it's too wordy to go into today, but I think that's something where if you're waiting for your formal validation every year to look at the effectiveness, that there's some steps you can take throughout the year to make sure that they're actually effective for your institution, meaning that you would probably, if it's not effective, you would need to create a new rule, which is not something that most validations cover. Again, they do above and below the line testing.
Okay, very good.
All right, so one last, I promise, this is the last slide before we get into all of the examples. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware that a lot of the documents we're going to go through, some have a macro and some have a micro impact. And by that, I mean, from a micro impact, you can really get specific rules, parameters, you can customize based on the information that's available. But that's not always the case, especially in sealed indictments, especially in the US, when it comes to human trafficking or other organized crime. Some of those don't unseal the indictment, meaning that you can't really see the nitty gritty. However, most times in a press release, you will see that there's some general information that you can take and kind of make that your new lens when you're looking at different customer types or different payment flows going from various countries. So don't always think that at the end of your review that you're going to have to come up with a rule and all of its parameters and everything. And if you don't, then that was a waste of time. That's certainly not the case. If anything, it can help reframe how you view your existing clients. Again, the quick effectiveness tests, the sea of available information, which I love that graphic there, because I remember swimming in that and feeling like I was drowning and nobody would hand me a lifesaver. They just kind of handed you more projects to do. And you're like, no, I really want a lifesaver as you're like swimming through this sea of information. So one of the things that I started doing was, because I had identified the threats that my country had, that my bank had at the time, I wanted to see very quickly, do I have any SARs related to human trafficking, threat finance, or drug trafficking? Those were kind of the three that I felt like, based on my institution size, based on its location, we had to have. We were the largest institution in a certain area. So when you're the largest institution, you're going to own the largest amount of dirty money, right? That's just kind of the nature of the beast. So why hadn't we not filed any SARs recently on these suspected underlying activity? And so that was something very quickly that you could do an effectiveness test. You can go out and say, okay, we're a $4 billion institution. We have a lot of farming community. We are located in a high traffic area with several interstates that run past most of our branches. We have not filed a human trafficking or a threat finance SAR or a drug trafficking SAR in the last several months. Boom, right there. That is an indicator that you should probably focus in on DOJ indictments, FATF guidance, Egmont cases, to make sure that you have the rules correctly done in terms of the parameters to detect some of the indicators of human trafficking, drug trafficking, threat finance. All right, so let's get to the Good stuff here. Okay. So this example is DOJ. Again, actually, our first two indictments are going to be DOJ. So I apologize if you're not based in the US, but just because it's just a DOJ indictment and it's not, something that the RCMP did in Canada or any other type of agency did, it doesn't mean that this isn't happening in your country. It just means that our judicial system allows the publishing of indictments like this in some cases. So this cartel, it's one of the largest, most dangerous drug cartels in Mexico. And what ended up happening was they unsealed 15 of these indictments against these individuals. And as you go through the press release, you'll see that they don't put it in a way where you can easily see exactly what the crimes were. So you have to click on the PDF and it loads, but boom, at the top, it states what the crimes are. So there was only a handful that actually that were charged with a money laundering crime. And this is one of the better ones here. So this cartel, they influence over 75% of the Mexican states, including key drug production and all the transportation methods that they have there. And so as we go through this, there are words that pop out to me. Now, this document is quite large for these two individuals that are indicted in this one PDF. And I don't have time, I'm sure you don't have time to go through. So what I do, like I talked about at the beginning, is I go through and I look for things that could end up being a data point in an AML system. Cash for gold companies, boom, right there. That's a non-bank financial institution. It could be a pawn company. We have industry indicators that could point me in the right direction for this data point here. We have directed payment, and it directed it in Mexico. It came from the US and it went to Mexico. Boom. We have data headers for wires that show when wires go to Mexico. We also see that wires came back to a US-based bank account that was controlled by a Mexican brokerage firm. Data point after data point. We have wires that come back, obviously, to the US. So the sending bank is in Mexico, coming back to the US, and it's being deposited into a brokerage firm. Again, that's a data point. That's a NAICS code. That's something that you're able to isolate in most monitoring systems. And there's something here that some monitoring systems don't ingest, but to me, I would be looking for an ultimate beneficial owner that's not a US person, a Mexican-controlled brokerage firm. So as you can see, there's lots of data points just in this one, just in the opening, right? This is just the overview. So to me, when you see something like this popping out at you, you don't necessarily need to read the rest of the indictment. To me, this is enough to go in and build a quick rule to see, do we have any of this activity? I know we have a few customers that are gold buying customers. I should go just look at their activity. Are they sending and receiving wires to another country? There is a great movie on Netflix, which I have ended my subscription due to their cuties thing, but for anyone else who still has it, they have a great show called Dirty Money. It's season 2, Dirty Gold. And I think it's the 4th episode in season 2. And it's great. And it talks about how cash for gold companies, gold refineries, all of these companies, both in the States or in the US and also in Latin America, really can be exploited. And so if you're looking for how that money laundering cycle would look like when you involve gold and gold out of the US, I would encourage you to watch a clip on Netflix. There's a DA, and it's actually him. There's no actor. It's the real DA that took this case on in Miami, and he draws out one of the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen, very clear. My 8-year-old was able to understand it. I didn't let her watch the whole movie, but just that one clip. And it shows exactly how gold is laundered. So, but this is something here, when you see these data points, those really should end up in some type of parameter or rule. All right. So this is the last poll very quickly before we move on to the next indictment, which is related to human trafficking. Well, actually later it is. I just want to ask you if anyone has filed two unique SARs. By unique SARs, I mean not recurring SARs. So for U.S. institutions, every 90 days, you have to review the account and file a repeat or recurring or continuing SAR. There's like 3 different terms for them, if the activity is ongoing. So I just wanted to know, last year, 2 unique SARs related to human trafficking.
Yeah. So while people are answering that question, we often hear from people in compliance community banks that they know their customers, and what do you say when people say that to you?
Yeah, so a lot of community institutions, that is what I hear. I used to hear it a lot more many years ago. But I think when the right people are in the AML department, they kind of struggle, especially if they've been at the bank or the credit union for a large amount of time. They really struggle with cutting off that, the customer's always right aspect with, this customer is a terrible person, right? They're like, it's tough for those two to live in peace inside a person. So, my thing I always tell clients, and I know this sounds a little harsh, is that whenever you look at a customer, not like eye to eye when they're standing in front of you, but like when you're looking at data, try to take out the emotional aspect of, oh, they're such a good customer, because at the end of the day, they are never going to tell you, I sell children out of my van, right? Like that, they are never, ever going to admit to the worst crime you can think of, right? So because they're never going to admit to that, you should automatically put them in that box and then work yourself off the ledge, with facts and data and analysis and things like that. But starting with giving them the benefit of the doubt never leads to a properly done investigation. That's what I found throughout my career, is if you start giving them the benefit of the doubt as your first emotional response to them, then the rest of your investigation is going to suffer.
And do you feel that if they can put those emotions aside, that they are more likely to be able to identify a human trafficking
Yes.
incident?
Yes.
Incident is not the right word, but
because for a lot of people, drug trafficking, yes, it's sad, and it's a terrible crime, and it does involve the destruction of individuals. Human trafficking is different. That's something that's like, how can someone do that? And it's hard to relate to that. So you kind of get a little like, there's no way that this man or this woman that I've known for 5 or 10 or 15 years would ever be involved in that, because it's such a unique crime. It's such a personal crime, right? I mean, that's your body and your human, your human nature. So, but projecting that onto a customer really does not lead to a properly done human trafficking investigation. At least I've found. So
okay. So it looks like everybody's had a chance to respond here, and so it looks like about a quarter of the respondents said that they filed around 2 unique SARs per year. There's, I think, a great number of people who have never filed or haven't filed a human trafficking SAR in a while.
Yeah, that's surprising. So, I mean, it's like, again, this is for me, like when I used to be an auditor, I am a recovering auditor, because I don't like serving clients up on a silver platter, but this is one of those things where very quickly, in the matter of a few minutes, that as an auditor, but both, an auditor and also a practitioner can do this. You go in and you sort your SAR list by reason for filing. And, to me, that's something that can be done in a matter of seconds, really. And you're able to get an indicator of effectiveness. If you've never filed a human trafficking SAR, that does not mean that it's not going on. It just simply means that you haven't found it yet. because it happens in every community. I was in $100 million bank. Actually, there were like $94 million in assets. The smallest institution I've ever been in, and this was over a decade ago, in the middle of nowhere, literally in the middle of nowhere. And I mean, it was a 45-minute drive from a hotel to get to this location.
Wow.
And they had an overworked compliance officer that wore 10 hats. So it wasn't that individual that didn't know, it was a matter of time. And, people to review. And they had a decent system, but their system wasn't tailored. It was all out of the box rules. So they never had historically filed a human trafficking SAR, and they lived in the middle of farmland. And by the time I left that project, we had filed 8 unique human trafficking SARs, mainly dealing with labor trafficking. And these were legacy customers. I mean, this was a tiny, tiny bank in the middle of nowhere. So just because you've never filed one does not mean that it doesn't exist. And so I'm hoping when we go through one of the next couple slides here that you'll be able to find some indicators of human trafficking. So let's go through this next indictment here. So this one is Canadian citizen. And there was a fraud money laundering ring that was associated, that they were brought up on charges. So as I go through here again, I have certain keywords that have popped out to me. So that's why I tried to illustrate for y'all here. So it's not just me telling you to look at this page and then over there I'm going to tell you how, what to look for. But I'm trying to show you that these are the things that stuck out to me. The funnel bank accounts, the investments were a sham, shell companies, laundered through more bank accounts and then sent overseas. The launderers receiving a percentage of funds that they moved, meaning that there would be money left in their bank account, right? You wouldn't see a clean 100,000 in, 100,000 out. They were able to keep a portion of that. So those are all important factors when you're looking at how to make sure that, if you bank a lot of investment companies, an indictment like this is very important to make sure that you have an effective monitoring program of your non-bank financial institutions. So when I see things like investment companies, I think, oh, again, that is an industry code. That's a data header that I can zero in on in a monitoring rule for most systems, not all, but for most systems. Again, the deposits from third parties, wires and checks, but you really got to start with the investment companies, because if you don't start there, if you don't try to narrow down exactly what this rule is going to be focused on, then you're going to end up with a whole bunch of false positives. You don't want that. So you have wires and checks out to other investment companies. You have the same name of the investment company. You have the same owners or the same registered agent. These are all important data points. Not all of them are going to sit in a 0-1 fashion, a byte fashion inside of your institution. Some are going to be more contextual factors that you're remembering as you're performing the investigation. So you go to the state site, you go to the business registry site, and you look it up and you see, oh, that registered agent name, that's Jane Doe. Then you go look up a sender of a wire into this investment company, and you look up that company name in the business registry, and up comes the same registered agent name, right? So then it kind of starts to spider, right? So you start to look at okay, these could be related institutions, maybe different beneficial owners and different signers, but we're still starting to see a little bit of a nexus here. There's foreign wires, they have no website, or their website makes claims that are out of this world. To me, I always think if I can't find a company online, I can't find them, and I'm good at finding stuff, and I cannot find them online, then how do they have this much revenue? How is that a justified amount of revenue or wires in if I can't find them on the greatest search tool the world has ever known, Google, right? If I can't find them, other than, the business registry search sites go and pick up the data from the state site of who owns what. Other than that, they don't have a business presence. How do customers find them? How do they have this money? So that's one of the important things to keep in mind when you're looking at investment companies specifically, especially in this case here, where they use boiler rooms, And then they collected all this money through fake investment, huge claims of return, all that kind of stuff. You aren't really going to be privy to that unless a customer is telling you that at the branch level. But you won't really know that that's going on. But these other data points you have full access to. All right. So this is a consent order. So this is not an indictment. I mean, it's an indictment in an informal sense, meaning that they are putting them on blast for what they did not do. And this was very interesting. This came out just from the New York State DFS, and it was against Deutsche Bank for their failures regarding Jeffrey Epstein. And as you read through this, like I mentioned earlier, it kind of gives you a blind spot indicator. And so this was something that for a few of my clients, where I know they have high net worth clients that are handled with kid gloves, that this would be something to kind of learn from, to evaluate what this consent order says, to see what the bank did wrong, and to make sure that you're also not doing those things wrong. Because while there's only one Epstein, or there was only one Epstein, it doesn't mean he's the only person, or Ghislaine Maxwell is the only woman who would ever be involved in the gruesome trafficking of humans. Crime is everywhere in the world. And so if you take Epstein out of this, there's a lot of things to learn and to screen against what you're doing. So these were the biggest factors, these listed here on the left-hand side. Negative news keywords. So there were prior cases related to the suspected underlying activity for money laundering and threat finance. There were cases going for years back that are actually mentioned in this consent order that the bank saw on their negative news and then decided, well, he was never put in jail, so therefore it doesn't really matter. And I actually have a client that this type of thing, not regarding human trafficking, but another suspected underlying activity, just went through. And one of their outside legal counsel told them, well, he was indicted, but he was never convicted. So they let him bring all of his funds over. And I thought, wait. Yes, we are not the legality police. We're not the morality police. But before you make that okay, you need to know exactly what the crimes were and what that looks like in terms of your own risk exposure. And that's something that this bank didn't really take into account. It wasn't him not being put in jail the first time many years ago in early 2000s is not an indicator of his innocence, and also an indicator of not having dirty money. You cannot correlate the two, especially because the justice system is not always correct. There were spidering of accounts and relationships as you read through this. And the yellow highlights there, I'd be happy to send you the PDF. I do have the full PDF. I didn't do the words that jump off the page because I had so many highlights. So if you want that full document, I can send it to you with my own highlights and comments in it. But signs of shell companies and front companies were something that were also listed in this consent order. Hiding behind a trust. A lot of times people are like, oh, well, it's a trust. It's supposed to be, supposed to provide that protection. Yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean everything going on is above board. And this was one of the things here. The activity aligns with the stated purpose. So this is one of the instances where they had disclosed a little bit, the surface level, the beginning level of what they were going to do with the funds. But just because they state that, and then they end up doing things that align with their general 10,000-foot purpose, doesn't mean that the customer, again, is above board. And these were all, this is literally just a tiny list of all the red flags that were not really cohesively analyzed. At least that's my opinion when I look through the consent order here. There were a lot of transfers to other higher risk industries. And just as a reminder for the US audience, we're one of the only countries in the world that does not impose anti-money laundering requirements and regulations on PSPs and non-bank financial institutions, other than MSBs. MSBs, obviously, we all know, money service businesses, they have their own AML regs. lawyers, payment processors, etc. These don't have anti-money laundering requirements. Therefore, they present more risk to you if you're dealing with one in the US, because again, they don't have any compliance standards when it comes to our industry. And then you would find throughout the consent order that they had a legal morality police issue. You know, they couldn't figure out, are we judging this guy because he likes really young women? So and it is tough to make that call, but I really encourage you, we're not making judgments. There's nothing illegal about an older man being with a younger woman. But when we know what he was indicted with, not what he was found guilty of, but what he was indicted with, and then you see all of the other indicators, it really is something that, people need to take into account when they have their own high net worth clients. Don't ignore that gut instinct that flags and goes, I don't know about this. Don't talk yourself off that ledge with other feelings. Talk yourself off that ledge with facts. And if those facts don't exist, then do the right thing. All right, I'm taking a little bit longer here because I want to leave some time for some questions. Do we have any questions, Anu?
We do. But, why don't we go ahead and finish your presentation, because there's a lot of interesting content there. And I would want to make sure that everybody has a chance to hear some of the information you're providing.
Okay, and I would be happy to answer all of the questions in writing if we run out of time. I remember attending these, and I hated it when people never answered my questions. So I would be happy to write out answers if we run out of time. So this is one of the FIU red flags. So this came out last year from FinCEN, which is based in the US. This is our FIU. And this was something that I thought was very interesting. I really don't have any clients, and I have a lot of community bank institutions, credit unions. And other than like 2 of them, I didn't see evidence of anyone actually ingesting this advisory that came out. Part of the reason is because it's quite a long document, and not everything in the document is something that pertains pertains to a financial institution. There's some that pertain to the virtual currency market, other things. But what I want to do in here is give you what I gave to my clients on how to at least do something with this, because at the end of this advisory, there is a blue box where FinCEN clearly states their reasonable expectation that all institutions will heed this advisory and take risk-based measures to see if they have anything involving the fentanyl trafficking advisory that came out. So now again, I have not found an examiner that has tested any of my clients to see whether or not they complied with FinCEN's last page that states that they are fully expecting institutions to incorporate these red flags. But the information is there, and that expectation of theirs is also stated. So as I read through here, I start compiling in my head all of the data pieces to go build a rule. So I have China, I have Mexico, and I'm not going to do, whether or not it's from China or from Mexico or to Mexico, even though that's what it states, because as you go through the rest of this, I think it's like 20 pages of this advisory, there are different pathways, both in and out of China and Mexico. So I'm just collecting these country codes because that is a data point. China, Mexico. I see here in their graph that they made payments via the bank via bank transfer. So when I hear bank transfer, that's not just wires. That could be an actual transfer internally. That could be an ACH payment out. That could be a P2P type of payment. And they went to chemical companies or shell companies. Again, if you have chemical companies, that is an industry code that you can isolate and you can look for. On the beneficiary side, right, if you have a customer that's sending a wire out to a chemical company, those aren't as easy to know other than looking at obvious words like chemical in the name, or something like that. So, but again, these are all things that several of the monitoring systems allow you to do. They allow you to search for a word. And if you don't have that ability to do so, then you can export. I know it sounds wonky, but you can export at least a snapshot of data where you can go through and look for the word chemical in a company's name, on your outbound wires, especially if they're going to China or Mexico. In addition, we saw cash deposits, money transfers, wires, We saw locations, Southwest border region. So that would be Southern California, Arizona. Let me see if I can remember Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. That's the Southwest border region. Those are states. That's an isolated data header. And Mexico. We have cash at an ATM, unsourced cash, no verifiable or legitimate purpose. This comes down to something I find in almost every client, which is you have individuals with, an above normal amount of cash. I'm not talking about, $5,000 a week, but I'm talking about several $1,000s, $1,000 to $3,000 a week, and they have no job that you can tell. What's that cash from on a consistent basis? Most people, let's face it, most people are going to get the majority of their income, even if they do work in a cash-based industry, they're going to get the majority of their income through a formal method because somebody's paying them and that person has to have a tax record in order to claim that. So if it is consistent smaller dollar cash and there's no purpose to it, the person's 24 years old, as far as you can tell, they don't have a job, they've never had a job the entire time they've been banking with you, those types of things kind of trip that no verifiable purpose or a legitimate purpose. Shell companies, again, are an indicator here. And throughout the end part of the document, they have these red flags, and I think these red flags are also good. You can take those different words that they list there, and you can actually put those in a search field. You can, one of the rules I did was I went through and I just did a rule searching any description field, whether it's ACH or wires, looking for any of the street names for fentanyl, which is actually a link that they have in this FinCEN advisory here. All right. So, and then they have more. So here's just kind of an overview of all of the rules of what we ended up looking for. And there were some clients where we ran this and we didn't find anything, but that's okay. We still did a change control form. We published our results. We said, hey, we ran this and we're going to run it again once a quarter because it shows that you're actually doing something with the advisory. Okay, so the FATF red flags for human trafficking. One of the reasons why I love the FATF, especially in this document here, this document, if you want to go look at it, it's from 2018, and there's 35 case studies, and the majority of the case studies, they underline the important stuff. So you don't even have to, scan it like we walked through before. You just go right to the underlining because that's that data header that you're looking for. So we have referrals from branches, frequent ATM cash deposits, several payments out for transportation when it's just, one person on the account. It's like, how can you go so many different places at once? Common telephone numbers, multiple purchases at drugstores, getting supplies for the men and women that they're keeping captive for sex trafficking. No employment, no justification for cash deposits. I'm just kind of go through here this quickly, but just so you know, this 2018 one from the FATF, they also do this type of thing for all of their other red flags that they publish. There's actually a link on one of the last slides here that takes you to the FATF site where they publish different guidance. And so it's always good if you get a chance. And when I was going through this document, I was scanning through it, and there were several case studies that had no financial crime indicators. So I just went right past them. It's not that you have to assign, you don't have to go in there and go read every single case study. You just look at them and go, okay, there's no financial indicators. Next one, there's no financial indicators. Okay, this one does. Oh, sorry. And then, all right, so this last one here is the Egmont cases. And there's actually a document, again, there's a link on the next slide. And they actually published their 100 cases of Egmont. And some of them go back to the 90s. It's kind of interesting to see how some money movement has changed from the 90s. But this is something that when you get a chance, to go through, maybe look for keywords in these documents. They all have searchable features. So look for human trafficking if you've never, filed a SAR in one of those before. A lot of times, count the burgers is a saying that a lot of my clients, say that I coach them on, because regardless of what it is, in this instance, it's a massage parlor. But even in a restaurant, in a pizza store, in a nail salon, count the burgers. How many massages per day would it take to account for that revenue? And is it normal? Would you be able to say, yes, that massage parlor does 100 massages a day at each location for $100 each, and that's how they get to this dollar amount? Most times, is that reasonable? No, that's really not going to happen. Even if they're the best massage parlor around, 100 massages per day for 5 days a week, every day of the week, in order to meet that dollar amount. So don't be afraid to count the burgers. Also, cross-border payments for businesses that really don't, most massage parlors, most nail salons aren't going to be wiring funds back and forth to, outside of their own country, unless it's to buy equipment, which you would see a one-time wire for that.
So, on behalf of myself, Nicole, who's diligently working in the background, I'd like to thank Sarah Beth Felix for today's presentation. As you know, I love talking to you. I think you're dynamic, and I love your perspective. I hope our audience really enjoyed hearing from you. And this is a reminder that if you don't already follow Sarah Beth on LinkedIn, I highly recommend that you do. She always provides insightful posts that are worth looking at and seeing how it applies to your organization.
Also slightly snarky too. I also have a little bit of a snark factor.
And you know what? A little bit of humor and a little bit of fun is always worthwhile. It's such a serious area. So, Sarah Beth, I really mean, I really enjoy our conversations, and I'm really thrilled that you were able to that you agreed to put together this webinar series for us. And I look forward to hosting the next two with you.
Yeah.
So with that, I'd like to close off the presentation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.